Socket guided the group to a large oval room, but halted them at the entrance. He made everyone wait while he scanned the blueprints again.
There's another security system here,
he said.
Looks like recharging hubs are built into segments of the walls in this area.
Axel scanned the room horizontally with her retinal sonars.
There are security guard automatons in the walls. Probably won't activate until we are midway through the room,
she said. Wrench yanked Ernest by one of his bound arms and shoved him towards the entrance to the room.
Let's make him run through and set them off,
he said.
We can take the robots out while they're targeting him. They won't see it coming.
Ernest shook a little on hearing this.
But they'll kill me,
he said with a nervous timbre in his simulated voice.
Or we could use his monkey,
Socket said, holding up the bag which still imprisoned Newton. Axel looked sternly at each of them in turn.
No,
she barked.
Nobody else dies today.
She snapped her fingers and her whole body began to glow. Her skin rippled and hardened as her muscles began shifting and expanding. Ernest thought she grew a couple of inches taller too. Within a few seconds, she resembled a living statue of an ancient Greek goddess. She tied her hair back into a long ponytail, then retrieved both of the pistols she kept in her thigh holsters.
I've got this,
she declared, and then strode into the center of the room. Axel was moving so fast, it almost seemed like there were two of her, Ernest thought. The scene was a blur of white limbs, gun flashes and explosions. Bits of the automatons were blasted off in all directions. As each one was activated, it rushed into the fray only to be gutted or beheaded moments later. Electrical sparks bounced off the walls and servo fluids ran slick across the floor. He counted at least 6 automatons in total, but it was impossible to be sure with the amount of severed limbs, torsos, and heads strewn throughout the room. When the fighting stopped, Axel's form came back into focus with her on one knee and with her arms outstretched to each side. The orange heat glow of her gun barrels gently dimmed, and as she raised her head up, her blue eyes shimmered through the fading smoke of the battle. Everyone except Ernest began whooping and hollering. The final leg into the heart of the vault was uneventful. Socket took care of the remaining security locks with relative ease and located the storage hold containing the prototype helm they'd gone through so much trouble to steal. They had removed the bonds from Ernest's wrists so he could activate the device. At that point, he'd given up trying to warn them. All he cared about was rescuing Newton and them both surviving the night. So when Axel took the helm to try it out for herself, he was resigned to let her follow through with the folly. Gears suggested that she shouldn't try to use it, that they had what they came for, and they should evac immediately. Axel wouldn't relent, though.
Crusher gave his life so we could get this thing, and I'll be damned if I don't find out if it was worth it,
she told her. Now she had it fitted on her head and was fastening the chin strap.
How do I activate it?
Axel asked, as she felt around its smooth, featureless surface.
You have to tap both sides at the same time,
Ernest replied.
You'll see a small yellow dot appear in front of you. Just concentrate on the dot, and the device will activate.
Axel was a little taken aback at the professor's quick response and eagerness to help. She gave Wrench a concerned look.
If this thing fries my brain, shoot him.
Wrench smiled and pointed his shotgun at Ernest's head, but the professor was too exhausted to care.
Bon voyage, then,
Ernest whispered to himself. Axel took a final, self-reassuring breath, then tapped the sides of the helm. She saw a small, yellow dot appear in front of her. It flickered slightly as she stared at it. For several seconds she didn't think anything was happening, but just as she meant to ask why it wasn't working, the dot suddenly became a bright white bubble that rapidly engulfed her. After what appeared to be a few seconds, Axel made loud gasping sounds, gripped the helm with both her hands, and ripped it from her head. She threw the device violently away from her, and she stumbled backwards, falling to the floor. The device clattered against the far wall and rolled around a couple of times on the ground upside down. It spun around, its own axis increasingly slowly, until coming to a rest. She backed away from it, dragging her body with her arms. Her feet kept slipping as she clumsily tried to use them to push herself as far away as possible. There was a look in her eyes that could only be described as horror, and she seemed to be mouthing a single word over and over again. The word, no. The rest of the team looked at her with concern, while Ernest used the distraction to retrieve Newton from Socket's backpack. Socket didn't even notice.
So now you understand,
he said, looking at Axel as he cradled his pet monkey in his arms. Axel snapped out of the trance she was in and stopped saying no over and over and cautiously took her eyes off the helm to look at Ernest.
That can't be real. What was that?
She asked him. He helped Newton climb onto his shoulder before explaining everything he knew.
I tried to warn you. That device should have been destroyed, but the company wouldn't let me,
he said. Axel started feeling everywhere on her body, and then the floor around her. She looked from person to person, as if shocked to see them, and then looked back at Ernest again.
This isn't real. Any of it. I'm not even real?
She said in a way that it almost sounded like a question.
That about sums it up,
Ernest said.
Based on everything I've learned from every unfortunate soul to have used that damn device.
Not real. What the heck are you talking about?
Socket asked, confused. Gears and Wrench were also unsettled, and were looking around, at everyone for some kind of reassurance. When they eventually returned to looking at Axel, she was still on the floor, grasping at the ground, with her hands, as if she was checking it was really there.
Axel, what did you see? Tell us.
Gears asked with concern.
What did I see?
Axel responded, sounding exhausted.
I saw everything and nothing.
It's a consciousness tunneling device, you see?
Ernest interjected.
We didn't set out to make it. It was an accident.
A what?
Wrench asked, also sounding concerned.
Well, from all the reports I've read, the device seems to allow the user to comprehend a higher level of reality. For us, it is a highly advanced piece of technology, but on a higher level of reality, it is just a literary device.
Axel had managed to sit herself upright and felt compelled to explain what it did to her as best as she could.
It showed me the truth,
she said.
What truth?
Gears asked. Axel looked at her with a strange look of both shock and pity.
The truth that this world, our lives, everything, are just words in a story.
Words in a story. What does that mean?
Socket asked.
All we are, everything this is, we only exist temporarily in the mind of a listener to a pre-written story.
She replied. Wrench wasn't the brightest of them, but he knew that he didn't like what she was saying.
Aw, fuck, this bitch has gone crazy,
he said.
This isn't just some story. This is reality. Crusher died. That's real.
Socket said angrily. He didn't believe her either. Axel thought of Crusher and was hit with a dull pain.
Oh, God, no.
She exclaimed.
Crusher lives every time someone listens to the story, and dies that terrible death every time, over and over.
Socket looked at her with a pained expression.
I don't understand. Why would that happen?
He asked.
We only exist whenever someone listens to our story. We only live while they are imagining us.
Axel replied.
Think about it.
She went on.
Isn't it strange that there are so many monkey and ape references in our world? Where even are we? When are we? I mean, all of our names are mechanical parts or tools. It's ridiculous. We're just characters in a trashy science fiction story, created by some lame amateur author. We only exist in their mind and the minds of their listeners.
Gears took a few steps towards Axel. Bewildered, she asked.
You're not making any sense because I know I'm real. Who are these listeners?
Axel didn't look at her. Instead, she dropped her head and stared dispassionately at the ground.
If we aren't in the minds of the listeners, then we don't exist. That is the truth, and I know now.
The team were a mixture of confused and perplexed. They had never known Axel to joke around or lie to them. They'd never known her to be anything other than serious and level-headed. But now she sounded completely crazy. Meanwhile, Ernest had taken the opportunity to make his exit. With Newton sleeping in his arms, he quietly walked away from the group and headed to safety outside of the vault. Axel was still sat on the floor, her body limp and devoid of energy. She looked up at her three friends, who had cautiously approached her.
Everything we do or think or say has already been written out. We have no self-determination, but do you want to know the most absurd part?
She asked.
It's all stories, within stories within stories. They don't know it, but like us, the listeners are just characters in their own story too.